Welcome to Break Away from the Rat Race, a podcast series to awaken your entrepreneurial spirit and help you achieve financial freedom. On our show, you'll learn about investments and how to create passive income. Let's get started with your host, Eric Martel.
Well, thank you, Kyla, and welcome to our very first episode of Break Away from the Rat Race. And as Kyla mentioned in the intro, our goal is to help you achieve financial freedom. And we're going to do that by helping you and talking about different ways in which you can generate passive income. And then once this passive income goes or is greater than your expenses, then this is our goal, basically achieving what we call financial freedom. And I'd like to kind of explain also what we call the show Break Away from the Rat Race, because, and maybe some of you are not familiar with the rat race. This is maybe a little bit an older term, but basically the rat race, if you imagine a rat or a hamster in a cage, they used to have, or they still do have, a wheel in the cage, and then you would have the hamster kind of run on that wheel. And that's kind of the idea here, is that you have a hamster or a rat that is running and running as hard as it can without really going anywhere. And we just feed it just enough so that it keeps on running on that wheel. So that's kind of the idea here, and it kind of corresponds to the idea of living paycheck to paycheck. And then also at the point where you want to retire and stuff like that, not having enough money for retirement is kind of the other point to it. And so I know it sounds a little bit dark and starting like that, but there's light at the end of the tunnel. And this podcast series, we're going to talk about all kinds of different ways in which you can generate passive income, so that you can work less and maybe eventually not work at all and still cover your expenses. But first, so for this podcast, I would like to introduce myself a little bit. So I was born from what I would call a lower middle class family. So I think that at that time, there was, I don't know if there was a middle class actually, but it didn't feel like it. So that's why, but we were not poor, but we were definitely living paycheck to paycheck. My parents worked very hard. Both parents worked very hard, and really living paycheck to paycheck. At retirement, what happens? My parents had basically no savings, right? So they had their house, and then they had the pension. I mean, luckily my father was working for a company that had a pension. Nowadays, the pension that we have is 401k. He had which is defined contribution pension. He had a defined benefit pension, which is much more generous, but you don't see that anymore, not too often anyway. So luckily he was working for that company, and so that provided him with a significant pension. So when he retired, then he was fine. But if he had to rely on his savings, like most of us have to do today, we have to rely on our savings to achieve retirement, then this is a little bit trickier. So my parents believed that if you worked hard and saved your money, you'll be okay. So this is what their parents told them. Just work hard and you'll be okay, right? So it's because often you were working at the farm, you were working in the factory, so that was enough. But what they taught me, they realized that it was not really a good plan, and they were seeing that the world was changing. So what they taught me was a little bit different. And they say, get a great education, work hard, save your money, and then everything is going to be okay. So they had realized that things had changed a little bit. So, so that's the great education, work hard. Obviously, now they got a sense that education is becoming more and more important. And we're going to talk again in another episode about the impact of education in your behavior. But also, as a child, I learned from their behavior. So they used to complain about money all the time. Again, when you live paycheck to paycheck, if you're missing $10 and you can't pay the electricity bill, they go pretty hard on you, and it doesn't look good. So they would keep the money in the bank where it is safe. That was kind of like their tendency. So saving. In those days, I think they even had like interest rate. If you put money in the bank, you would actually get a little bit of interest. So we don't have that anymore, do we? So that's a little bit different. But so that was kind of their mentality. So the safe, it was all about being safe. They also saw their parents in the Great Depression. So it was really fresh in their mind, 1929, and how their parents were impacted by that crisis. So because of that, they felt that putting money in the bank and saving money and having cash was really important, but they couldn't really save that much. And so every time they had a little bit of an emergency, then it would take away from that. And then you can see that, that kind of it's a reinforcing mechanism that, that's a good thing that I save money, because if I didn't have it, then I would go into trouble, whatever. So that's kind of the idea. Credit card, they didn't like credit cards. I think they came a little bit later, but they really didn't trust the credit card, and definitely they would not invest in anything. The stock market, first of all, was too complicated, and they thought it was a scam, and then they couldn't trust anything. Of course, fear and not understanding and not having the knowledge, they are very closely related. So if you don't know something, if you don't know the stock market, if you don't know anything about the stock market, so you're going to try to stay away from the stock market. You're going to be afraid of the stock market, and you're not going to invest in it. So that's going to be the tendency. And obviously, the other way you could do it is to learn more about the stock market. Find a mentor that's going to help you understand how the stock market works, and then decide if you want to make an investment or not. So their other belief was that rich people got rich by cheating. So they were cheating people or stealing, and then there's no way you can do it honestly, and all of that. And it depends on a lot of different kind of like philosophy or ideas. Some people believe that making a profit is immoral. So you shouldn't make a profit, and so that's one aspect of it. Other people and groups believe that profit is fine, but up to a certain point, then it becomes kind of obscene. So there's the two extreme. But really, obviously, profit is something that must be you must have in order to survive and to make a great investment. So this is obviously something that I have to fight for. For my parents, making a profit was something that was kind of cheating, kind of stealing from people, which is not true which is not my current belief system. Let's just put it that way. And of course, you all heard of money doesn't bring happiness, and my comeback obviously is that, well, it sure helps, but not having money doesn't bring happiness either. They forget to mention that. Living paycheck to paycheck, that doesn't bring happiness. So, might as well have a little bit of extra money. And, when we're talking about financial freedom, we're not talking about making billions of dollars. We want to make enough passive income so that we don't have to work or work less in order to cover our expenses. So that's all we want to do. So, and you'll see that when we go through these ideas, that you can there's a number of different ways you can do that, and you don't need to have $1 billion or many millions of dollars in order to achieve this. Okay, so we'll talk about that. But so all these things, you probably have heard of all these these sayings or these kind of ideas before, these concepts. I mean, they're pretty antiquated, and I think a lot of people actually moved out of that. A lot more people right now invest in the stock market. A lot of people believe in investment and all of that and making a profit. But for me, in those days, I mean, this is what I was hearing all the time. This is kind of where I was up until I went to high school, and I then, after a couple of years, I think I started an investment club. I was one of my teacher was an investor in the stock market, and I was very intrigued by that. I wanted to learn more, and he kind of became my mentor at the beginning to explain how the stock market was working and etc. And then I created an investment club where we pool our money with a bunch of friends, and we invested in the stock market. In those days, I think it was like the commission for buying stocks was horrendous. It was I forget the number, but it was not like it is today. But anyway, so I started an investment club, and the goal was obviously to learn about the stock market. And we invested in some stock, and that was really fascinating to me. And I really enjoyed that. Not only because we buy a stock, and then you see the stock go up or down, etc. What really interested me is the ability to learn about so many different businesses, and having their financial reports, all their disclosure about how they operate their businesses, looking at all the numbers behind it. I thought that was fascinating. And this was my first real kind of like, how should I say that? Like exposure to business. Okay, well, this is great. This is a great business. Look at how they make money. Look at how their expenses are. Look at their revenue. Look at their strategy, etc. And then that's when I decided that this is something that I want to do. I want to make a company, make a business, to do something like that. At university, I studied actuarial science. So I was, if you're not familiar with actuarial science, this is basically the study of mathematics, financial information or finance, and probability and statistics. So it's kind of combining these three elements into one science. And typically the work that you do as an actuary is work for an insurance company, or work for a pension plan, or you can also work for insurance companies, or like a car or house insurance. So that's what we would do. We would calculate the reserve or calculate the premium for these companies. So I really liked it. Again, more math and the finance aspect of it, and then with me reading the stock market and getting the financial information and the annual report for these companies, and really reading them and understanding what they were doing. I thought that was I was reading a ton of those, so I really enjoyed that. And but during my first year, so that was kind of like the track I was going for. But during the first year of university, so I had a girlfriend, and her mother is, oh my God, it's so complicated. But my girlfriend at the time had her mother was going out with a guy that was a real estate investor. And he was fascinating to me. And he was a regular college, so we have a junior college. So he was just a teacher at a junior college. And he had a specific approach for investment. I mean, he was always thinking kind of, I wouldn't say necessarily out of the box, but he was really thinking a lot about how to solve his problems. And he would come up with some interesting ways of solving problems sometimes. But really, I mean, his main skill, I would say, is that he would sit down and really identify the problems or that he had to solve, and then he would look at all kinds of different alternatives, and then he would pick a couple and then kind of explore them a little bit deeper. So it was very, very interesting to me. And he became my mentor. at that time during university. And there was, in those days, there was all these ads about buy houses, no money down, and all of that. And so I was intrigued by that, and then I had talked to some realtors, and they said, that's not possible, blah blah blah. But this my mentor told me, well, it is possible. I mean, you just have to, there's different methods of doing it, and blah blah blah. And he explained a couple of different ways that this can be accomplished. And one of those ways was a seller financing. So you would get a first mortgage, and then you would get seller financing for the rest of the mortgage, the rest of the purchase price of the house. So after he told me that, then I went to a realtor, and I kind of worked with a realtor, and I looked at rental property. So I wanted to have a rental property that was cash flow positive and with no money down. So I had made some assumption, blah, 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 and I kind of calculated. I looked at a couple of these properties that the realtor that I was working with was suggesting to me. And then everyone that he was showing me said, well, this is not cash flow positive. Well, this one is not going to be cash flow positive. And I was kind of like going through like in details all the time. And then he was trying to convince me basically by giving me, a number of properties that would not meet that would not be cash flow positive, to show me that, this is not possible. What you're looking for doesn't exist. So I asked him, I said, okay, well, why don't you give me your listings, the MLS listing? And I'm doing this sign because in those days, it was not, but there was a computer, but it's not like I didn't have a laptop. So he gave me basically a printout, a binder full of printouts of the MLS listing. And I had to go through them. So there was like hundreds of them. And so that was a little bit overwhelming. You didn't want to go through the details of it all. So I had kind of like a rule of thumbs where I could really quickly look at a couple of numbers, the price, the total rent, and I had some assumptions. And then I was able to, if this ratio is this, then, this is something that I want to explore further. Let me get some water. So this is something that I want to explore further. So out of that process, I probably got, 5 or 6 properties. So that's not many. Out of like hundreds of properties that I looked at, there was 5 or 6 of them that met my criteria that could be cash flow positive, right? But one of the component obviously was that I had to get seller financing. I'm assuming that I could get, so one problem at a time, right? So I'm assuming that I could get the first mortgage from a bank somewhere. So that's past that. Then the next critical problem was to figure out, will the seller be willing to give me a second mortgage? So do seller financing. So my realtor basically contacted them, and there was, out of the 5 or 6, there was one of them that was willing to do seller financing. And so that's the one I focused on. And then I looked at all the numbers, visited the property and all of that, and get all the information that I could. And then we went ahead with the deal. Now the next problem was finding the first mortgage. Now I knew where the second mortgage was. I had to find the second mortgage. And so all of this was happening while I was still at university, on my second year of university. So I still had college classes to go to and all of that, so I was pretty busy, and but I that's what I wanted to do. So I met a couple of banks, and then the banks basically rejected me. I was nobody, just a student with no money. And then I went to a credit union, and then she was very supportive, and then I showed her the numbers, and it was cash flow positive. I think it was generating like $250 in net cash flow, something like that. It was an 8-unit multifamily apartment in a very not so good part of town. And So that's what we did. And then she looked at that. I said, well, it makes sense. You've covered that. You have contingency funds in there. That's in your budget and all of that. So everything looks good. So I'm gonna go and I wouldn't mind submitting that to the board and then see if they approved your application. So I said, okay, that sounds good. And she said, well, she needed a check for $75 for the application fee. And so I still remember writing that check because I only had $100 in the bank for the rest of the month. So writing that check meant that I'd have to beg for food somewhere. So I wrote the check $75, and I had the mortgage was approved, and we were able to close in the week or two later. So that was great. So that's kind of my story on that real estate part of it. And then once I got this property, then that money, the cash flow was working great, and really, that was a pretty good experience in general. And we can talk a little bit later about kind of like what I could have done differently and stuff like that. But the key is that it was, we talked about comfort zone. This was really, as you can imagine, as far out of my comfort zone as it could be. This is I was like, what, 18, 17? I don't remember. But second year of university, and then I was, I hadn't bought anything yet. I'd never even buy a car, never had a loan or anything like that. And now I was the proud owner of an 8-unit multifamily property that was generating cash flow. So definitely out of my comfort zone. And what really helped in all of this is my mentor. Because first of all, by telling me that, when everybody's telling you, this, you can't find that, that's impossible, that doesn't exist. And, then he would tell me, he said, well, no, it is possible, blah, blah, blah. And he would offer me some additional options and things to look at, etc. But he basically kept me going into continuing to look through that big binders. I think there was 2 big binders of MLS listings that I had to go through. So just kind of, I would say, encouragement in a difficult situation. I mean, this is what he brought to me, I think. Also being able to help me kind of solve problems. And on my own, I would be the one solving the problems, but he would be kind of guiding and say, well, have you looked at that? Have you looked at this? What about this? Think of it this way, etc. So he would really try to make me think more and differently about the problems that I was facing. What else did he help me with? And then the other thing too is really about when we get out of that comfort zone, is it's uncomfortable. It's uncomfortable, but it's nice to have a voice and somebody that's kind of beside you and tells you, no, this is okay, because if kind of like play what if scenario. What if they don't do that? And what if they don't accept this? And they would say, well, that's it. You just lose your $75. And what if this and this, and then you realize that there's all the fears that you had about the unknown, about the fact that you're in an uncomfortable situation. It just raises a lot of fears and a lot of risk and what if scenarios. And a lot of the time you kind of have to list them down and say, okay, what if this happens? And then, and then kind of look at it very objectively. And often you're going to realize that it's not that bad. Your worst case scenario is not that bad, but you still have fear. It doesn't remove the fear. It just changes it slightly, and you have to go and push through to get it done. Then eventually, after a while, it becomes a very very common, very comfortable, and you don't even think about it. But it takes a while to get it done. So that's right. So having a mentor, like I mentioned, so means that you have someone that encourages you and confirms that you're on the right path. So it's kind of a coach in a way, helping you do things a little bit better, maybe help you solve problems, and then reduce that fear and walk you through the process so that that's also part of the fear, is to kind of walk you through the process, having an understanding of what's going to come next, what other things you need to look at. So, this is kind of the idea. And hopefully, this podcast is going to help you with that. There are definitely some of the people that I intend to interview are doing things that I'm not familiar with, and I'm going to ask a lot of questions, and you're going to be welcome to ask questions as well. But to really do these businesses, and some of them I'm going to be doing them as well. So I'm going to probably invest some monies in some of these businesses and see, what happens with that. But so we'll see. So what else do I have? So these skills that I learned from my mentor, then I was able to basically use them not only in real estate investment, which is where he was mainly focused, but I use them everywhere in every other businesses that I do, and also about the habits that he had, where he would wake up pretty early in the morning and then just sit down and then think about what needed to be done, what problems need to be solved. And he had a goal every day on what needed to be accomplished. And he would go one step every day, one step forward. And, and he did some amazing things, I think, especially with the resources that he had when he started on the salary of a simple junior college teacher. So over the years, I created multiple companies, some consulting companies, other types of companies as well, where the focus was, when I created them, where the focus was to generate passive income and how to do that. And we'll talk about some of these companies and where they are today. And there's also going to be a lot of lessons learned in those for these companies, right? So that way you can kind of leverage what we've learned with these companies and do them yourself, do them better, and then not step in the same puddles that we stepped into. So that was kind of like the history. But about 10 years ago, so my focus really changed, or I became more focused. I don't know, one or the other. And the focus was really on the passive income, really focusing on that. I had done a lot of investment in the stock market. It was, going well and doing good returns, but I had to actively, look at the stock market every day, do trades every day. And it's just a little bit, this is it's a job really. So really focusing on passive income, and the drivers for me for the passive income was to have more flexibility. I mean, I do a lot of consulting. I do presentations, etc., and talks, and but having the flexibility to basically go on vacation for 6 months or 3 months and then not having to worry and still have money coming in. So that was the big driver for this, having the flexibility. And then also participating in joint ventures. So for example, one of the joint ventures that I'm working on right now, which will launch in September, I wouldn't be able to do it if I didn't have the safety net of passive income. So that's one aspect of it. So the other thing is creating that safety net is not just for me. It's a safety net and a passive income that's generated for the entire family. So this is great. So if I pass away, I don't need insurance. I know that my family is going to have passive income from the companies and from the rental properties that we have. So that this is great. If I become injured or if I crippled, or maybe that's not the right term, but handicapped from some sort and I can't work anymore, then I have the same safety net. So I know that the passive income is going to continue to come in. So that's the driver there. And then the other key is leaving a legacy for my children. There's when my parents' mentality was that their money was their money, and then they would spend all their money by the time they're dead, so don't count on any inheritance and all of that. And I kind of believed that for most of my life, but now I certainly don't believe it. And I don't believe it because I'm looking at the future, and I'm seeing that the future is going to be a lot more difficult to my children and their children than how difficult it was for me. So I'm just looking at the cost of education here. When I went to university, a semester was like $500 with the books. So, and here, of the whole year, so that's $1,000 a year for university, right, in Montreal. And then, but here, as you know, in the U.S., $25,000, $30,000, $50,000, $60,000 a year in university is common. So I knew, and if the trend continues, I mean, my grandkids won't be able to afford university. I mean, it's going to be impossible. So that's kind of this is the idea here: leaving a legacy for my children. I don't want. Why would I want my kids to go back to ground zero and start from scratch? Why not leverage what I have, the assets, the knowledge, and all, and the expertise that I have, and the time that I have, to build a legacy, to build a company, and have them involved in that company and in that business, and grow it, so that when I'm gone, then they just continue on with the business. They grow it further, and to me that's and they know how to manage it because they've been part of the business since its inception almost. So that's kind of these are my three drivers really around the passive income. So the more flexibility, obviously, because I want to travel, I want to see the world a little bit more. I was pretty lucky in the past, and now I want to do some more of that. So that's kind of where we are with that, and that's what I wanted to touch on in this particular podcast. In the next podcast, and what we're going to do in the next future podcast is going to be again about achieving financial freedom, what I want to do is what I want you to think about is about your goals. Why do you want to achieve financial freedom? And then look at your expenses. How much expenses do you need to live on your passive income? So you can look at your current expenses and say, well, I would move to another place if I didn't have this job, or I would do this, or I would do that. My expenses would be lower, but then I would also travel more. I would spend more money on other things. So create a budget where your expenses for your future life with financial freedom. And then we're going to kind of draw a line between the two, or you'll draw a line between the two to figure that out. So that's kind of what we have for today. And if you have any questions, feel free. So if you're on YouTube, then you can go down below, leave your comments. You can send me a message, as I mentioned, on Facebook, Break Away from the Rat Race. And leave comments, let me know how it is, and if you have any specific questions, topics, if you have great stories that you want to tell, positive or negative, that people can learn from, feel free to share with the community, and send me your information. Maybe I'll interview you to so that our listeners can learn from your experience, positive or negative. So there we go. All right. So have a good day.
Thank you for listening to Break Away from the Rat Race with your host, Eric Martel. If you want to share your story and experience with our listeners, please message us on Facebook at Break Away from the Rat Race. Also, please subscribe to our YouTube channel and our podcast on iTunes.